What is up, everybody? Welcome to the latest edition of Dynasty Diehards. And folks, we have a great show for you today. I am joined by my co-host, John Helmkamp, and the one and only Dave Kluge. You know him from Football Guys. I know him from Twitter, and he lives just up the road from me. Guys, we're so excited to have Dave on. We're going to break down everything that has happened so far today with legal tampering and free agency, and there is a lot to talk about. Dave, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. And I just want to say you know me from Twitter. We know each other from Fantasy Intervention, man. Like
That's
years and
true.
years and years ago. Like
That's
you were one of my
true.
first connections in
God,
this space. So we've done countless shows together, had countless beers together, and
that is
always a good time
true.
hopping on the screen with you.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna enjoy this. There's so many things that have happened. We've got news still breaking right now. But the first thing I want to talk about, because Dave, this is near and dear to your heart, because you are from the Chicago area, the Bears. They
The
engineered a
Bears.
they engineered a crazy trade. If you haven't heard about this trade and you're watching, they gave up the first pick for the ninth pick, the Carolina Panthers' ninth pick, DJ Moore, a 2024 first round pick, a 2025 second round pick, and they got the 61st pick back from Carolina as well in this year's draft. That's a haul. Now, I know there were questions about Ryan Pace coming onto this team. Was he going to do a good job? It didn't look like last season he was doing great. But Dave, what do you think about what he's done so far this offseason? Is this giving you some hope for this franchise?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you can watch this move that just went down and not have hope for the franchise. And when he first came on staff, I loved what he was doing, shedding a bunch of veteran contracts. You know, he got rid of Khalil Mack, who still got an autograph picture up here. Khalil Mack, one of my favorite Bears ever. Shed, Robert Quinn off the books, and getting rid of those veteran contracts made sense. But then when he traded away Roquan Smith for a second, and then we traded away a second round pick for Chase Claypool, I started to question Poles a little bit. And I was like, I don't know if this is the guy that I want going in with a high draft pick and a ton of salary cap. But this move shows that he has a long-term plan and he is sticking to it. I mean, really what we basically did with this move is you swapped out the number one overall pick, which it was going to be a quarterback that we didn't really have a need for essentially five guys that are going to be making a difference. You're looking at 2 first-round picks, DJ Moore, and 2 second-round picks. That's 5 potential starters that we are getting for the number one overall pick, which we had no need for. So I don't know how you can look at this and not be excited about it. Justin Fields has his wide receiver one. We are loaded up with draft capital for the next 2 years. It's very, very exciting for Chicago fans, and that's why I'm rocking my Bears shirt today.
I love it. So the Bears now have 6 picks in the first 4 rounds. I mean, that's building blocks. Is this a team you think, Dave, that can compete in the NFC North?
Okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit. I'm excited, but I don't know if we're ready to compete quite yet. You know, Minnesota still got Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and a pretty explosive offense there. And the Lions, despite their record last year, are a very good team that is probably a year ahead of where the Bears are right now. It looks like they're pushing to contend right now, especially with the addition of David Montgomery. And the Packers, yeah, Aaron Rodgers is probably out of the NFC North, but this could be, I feel battered, like just been beaten by Packers my entire life. So after seeing Favre and Rodgers, like I'm not going to chalk Jordan Love up as a bust. I just almost am anticipating him to be a very good player when he steps into the role. So I don't know if they're ready for contention yet, but they are certainly set up for a very, very bright future.
So I want to go back to something you said, Dave, about Jordan Love. Obviously he's going to be the guy. We saw flashes of him playing decently, and obviously this franchise believes in him. They picked up his 5th-year option, so now we're finally going to get to see him on the field. John, what do you think this Green Bay offense is going to look like now, sans Rodgers with Jordan Love at the helm?
Man, I kind of feel bad for Jordan Love in a sense because he's going to have some very, very large shoes to fill. Like you said, we went from the handoff from Favre to Rodgers, taking, the last – I don't know how many years it's been that those 2 quarterbacks were at the helm for the Green Bay franchise. And now all of a sudden Jordan Love, hey, guess what? You're next, kid. Hope you're ready. And he better be ready. He's been sitting for like 4 years. So Jordan Love, I'm not sure. He has shown flashes. I think that it can be interesting. I'm not really sure what this offense is going to look like, especially Alan Lazard is also on his way to the Jets. So you have just young wide receivers right now for them to try and grow with. I think that they can still be a good offense. They still have Aaron Jones. I feel like every name that I'm saying, I'm questioning myself as to whether or not that player is still with the team that they were on because of everything that's happened in the last week. But I'm like, wait, he's still there, right? Yeah. So I think that offense can still be good. I think it can still put up some very respectable numbers. But I think it's hard to say that Jordan Love is going to just step right in and lead them to being a top tier offense.
Sure. Now, you mentioned Allen Lazard, and real quick before we get into him, just last thing on the Bears. Dave, what are they doing with that 9th pick?
I think we got to wait to see what happens in free agency. I mean, I've heard rumors about Bijan, which would obviously be a lot of fun to pair up with Justin Fields and Khalil Herbert to have just an unstoppable run game. But I really think a lot of it comes down to who they're going to end up getting in free agency, because they really need that interior offensive lineman. And if they're able to get that, then I think that sets them up where they can go, splurge on an offensive weapon in the draft. Maybe take, Jackson Smith-Njigba or Bijan Robinson or something like that. But if they don't, they're probably going to have to go tackle at the top of the draft if they're unable to get Orlando Brown within these next couple of days.
Well, and as John and I talked about a couple weeks ago, there's some good offensive tackles available in this draft. So if that's the route the Bears want to go, they'll get a good one there with that 9th pick. Now let's move on to Allen Lazard. Signs a 4-year, $44 million deal in the Big Apple. Now we know that's because he's getting paired up with Aaron Rodgers, who I am so sick of hearing about. We're only mentioning his name in passing, don't want to talk about it. We've heard plenty about it. Now there's rumors that Randall Cobb could be going there next. So it's kind of like Packers light right now in New York is what Aaron Rodgers is trying to build. But Garrett Wilson's still the wide receiver 1 in New York, correct?
Oh, of course. Yeah. I don't know if that was a rhetorical question or not, but of course Garrett Wilson is the wide receiver 1. But there is a very strange narrative here. And John, I'm sure you know all about this narrative with Aaron Rodgers, that he slowly develops and grooms his wide receivers. I mean, he's never had a first-round wide receiver. So immediately Garrett Wilson is the best prospect that has ever played with Aaron Rodgers. I know that's kind of hard to believe, but no receiver outside of Aaron Rodgers' first year, where Greg Jennings was a year 3 receiver, no receiver in their first 3 years with Aaron Rodgers has ever eclipsed 1,000 yards. He has this very strange penchant where it takes him time to kind of build trust and chemistry with his guys. And I think that's why he's so dead set on bringing over Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb and Mercedes Lewis and these guys that he already understands their tendencies and their nuance and where they're going to be on the field. And he kind of builds this unconscious chemistry with them. So obviously Garrett Wilson is the guy here. He's the best player by a landslide, but Allen Lazard is going to have some sneaky upside there just because of the chemistry that he and Rodgers have developed over the years.
Well, sure, and I fully expect them to throw the ball a lot, and he should be 100. Allen Lazard is the dirty work guy, but he's still going to see the targets. Because of that dirty work, he's on the field. John, is there anything to the Randall Cobb? Do you think he is an impact player in New York in fantasy?
No. Next. No, like I'm not interested at all in fantasy and Randall Cobb. I've always liked Randall Cobb a lot as a player. And when he was in his prime, what he was doing up there in Green Bay, tormented Bears fans like Dave and I to no end. But he's well past his prime. I'm not going to go into the Aaron Rodgers thing. I don't want to. But him just trying to like run it back and get his guys, his friends, his buddies to come to New York and give that list of demands to the Jets front office. Say, hey, if you want me, I need you to sign these players. Like, dude, you already have good wide receivers in New York. You're arguably making your offense worse by asking the Jets to go get these players. Like, just trust the guys that are there, work on building that rapport with them instead of spending so much time in, quiet bomb shelters and stuff like that and in darkness retreats. How about actually going on like a team retreat and taking your wide receivers to Hawaii for a week and throwing with them in the sand and like do stuff like that? I don't know. It's a joke to me, but Garrett Wilson is an elite wide receiver. And honestly, I don't see any way that his stats are worse than they were last year with, 4 different quarterbacks rotating in New York last year.
Oh yeah. And that's a good point. There was no stability in New York. Dave, go ahead. What did you want to say?
All I was going to say, I think the only fantasy relevance that Randall Cobb is going to be making Elijah Moore irrelevant, which is the unfortunate truth here. He's going to get just enough snaps that we're not going to see Elijah Moore get the snap share and target share that we'd like to see.
So now
I'd love for them to trade him. Like, I would love to see the Jets set Elijah Moore free and try to recoup some draft capital that they're arguably going to be, giving up to bring in other players for Rodgers that he wants. Like, move Elijah Moore to an offense that actually wants to feature him in the slot. And I think that'd be the best case scenario for everybody.
So what if he's a part of the trade? Because I don't think they're going to hold on to him. It doesn't make sense at this point. They've tried to get Elijah Moore to be a thing. They couldn't get him to be a thing. I think he ends up in Green Bay. Does that maybe unlock him a little bit? He goes to Green Bay. He actually finally gets the opportunity in an offense that maybe actually wants him.
Yeah, and I think, what we talked about a little bit is, Brett Favre just immediately coming in and being successful in Green Bay, and then Rodgers doing the same thing. And they had good receiving cores when they came in. Favre's rookie year, or not his rookie year, but his first year with Green Bay, he was throwing to Sterling Sharp. And then when Aaron Rodgers came in, he had Greg Jennings. And now with Christian Watson and Elijah Moore, Jordan Love's in a pretty friendly ecosystem for quarterbacks. They've got a strong run game with A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. So if he's got Christian Watson as his number one and Elijah Moore as his number two, all of a sudden we can look at a somewhat explosive offense maybe coming out of Lambeau.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's move on here. We're going to move on to, as you guys mentioned earlier, David Montgomery lands in Motor City. Obviously the replacement for Jamal Williams. And I know a lot of people are trying to make excuses for DeAndre Swift. No, this doesn't affect his value. But guys, we keep waiting for him to take off, and he does it in these little spurts. I've been off of him since his rookie year. I just didn't see it. He looks like a guy running into a brick wall at the goal line. He just cannot score in the red zone, plain and simple. Is David Montgomery going to suck a ton of value from DeAndre Swift, or is there still value there as like an RB2, RB3 flex play for Swift with DeMont there? John?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say on that is when Swift is given opportunities, especially in the passing game, he rips off big chunk plays. So he has the capability of producing for your fantasy team. He's not going to be a 250 to 300 touch running back, I don't think, ever in his career. If I'm being blunt, I just don't see it happening. But as an RB2 flex play kind of guy, yeah, I think there's still value there. In Dynasty, I'm almost starting to think that DeAndre Swift might be a buy right now with this news. I think that there's a pretty good case to be made that the panic button is being pressed all over the place, and kind of rightfully so. But if you get someone to panic too far, if I can give up a rookie's second and get DeAndre Swift, yeah, dude, like that's valuable. If I have someone that's going to see probably 175 touches, maybe to 200 touches on the year, and then you have David Montgomery coming in and taking the Jamal Williams, pound the rock role, then in PPR in particular, I think that DeAndre Swift might actually be a buy right now.
Well, see, and I think it's important to point out that David Montgomery's red zone share last season was 57.6% amongst running backs, whereas DeAndre Swift only drew 28% of carries in Detroit. So I think it's fair. Monty's going to be that pound the rock guy. Is he a high-end RB2 now in this offense, do we think?
So I don't think that we've seen the end of the backfield moves for Detroit. And I think a lot of people have this conception that David Montgomery is going to take over Jamal Williams' role. And I don't see that. I don't know why. I feel like I look at David Montgomery as a very different player than a lot of other people do. He is very good in the passing game. He's great in pass protection, which is something that DeAndre Swift struggles in. And while he doesn't have the straight line speed that DeAndre Swift does, he's kind of elusive in the open field. So I think that his skill set actually overlaps with DeAndre Swift a lot. It wouldn't surprise me if they retain Jamal Williams or bring in somebody else like Jamal Williams that can be the between the back guy and the goal line guy. Well, David Montgomery can kind of take on the passing role. We've seen now, I mean, it's been 3 years where they just have not been able to figure out how to utilize DeAndre Swift in Detroit. And, I think if a team calls up and says, hey, we'll give you a 4th-round Swift for DeAndre Swift, or a 4th-round pick for DeAndre Swift on the final year of his deal, I think the Lions are pretty inclined to move him right now and try to recoup some of that value before he inevitably walks after this season in free agency. So I think that we haven't seen the end of how this backfield is going to shake out in Detroit.
So you're thinking they could keep Jamal Williams, get rid of DeAndre Swift, then we could be looking at a Jamal Williams, David Montgomery backfield. That excites me.
Or if not Jamal Williams, maybe drafting somebody. But I think that I just don't know if Montgomery is cut for that between the tackles, goal line work that we saw Jamal Williams get last year.
Sure. That's fair. It's an interesting situation, and we talk about all this stuff now, and like you said, Dave, so much could change. They could end up going after a running back in the draft, another running back in free agency. But the fun part of all of this is that we get to talk about it. We have something to talk about this time of the offseason. So the next thing we're going to talk about, folks, this is an interesting one to me. Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Myers both to the Las Vegas Raiders. It looks like Josh McDaniels is putting the band back together, to quote the great Blues Brothers from Chicago here. Dave, is this an upgrade at quarterback over Derek Carr? Because it doesn't feel like it to me at all.
It's not. Nate, I don't know how you feel about Josh McDaniels. I think that he is probably the most overrated coach in the NFL. I'd even go as far as to say that he's one of the worst coaches in the NFL. I talked with Cecil Lammey about this recently, over at Football Guys, and he's a Denver beat reporter. And he had nothing good to say about Josh McDaniels during his time with the Broncos. He has that smartest guy in the room mentality. He shipped Jay Cutler off so he can draft Tim Tebow, and now here he is shipping off Darren Waller.
There's the animosity. There's the animosity. That's
all the roads come back to Jay Cutler, always.
Everything, buddy.
But really, I think that he just has that smartest guy in the room mentality. And shipping off Derek Carr, who has been a not great, but serviceable quarterback. Ship it off Darren Waller, which, I guess you can chalk it up for the injuries, but trying to bring back all of the guys that he knows from the Patriots. I get what he's trying to do, instilling the Patriot way. But we saw Matt Patricia try to do this a few years ago in Detroit, and it blew up in his face. It seems like every single guy that has left New England to go get a coaching role and bring in expatriates players, it never works out. So I don't know why they're trying to do the same thing, but I am not buying into this at all. I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders are a 3 or 4 win team this year.
I love that, Dave. I agree with you. And here's, when the Raiders hired Josh McDaniels ahead of last season, I remember looking at Jen and saying, oh, good, they're not going to be a problem in the AFC West for a while. Because and it's not just what he does while he's the coach and the personnel moves he makes and the culture, it's the aftermath of the moves he makes. Because Denver was dealing with that for 3 or 4 seasons after McDaniels. And with the moves he's making, to me, it feels like he's doing the same thing. You ship off Darren Waller, you ship off an elite pass catcher, and sure, he's at the back end of his career more than likely. He's been banged up the last couple of seasons, but it's still Darren Waller. He still can catch the ball if he can stay on the field, and you're taking a weapon away from Jimmy Garoppolo. So now he's got Foster Moreau. This just reeks of incompetence to me, Dave. I'm with you. John, where do you sit on this?
I think that Josh McDaniels and Aaron Rodgers are trying to play the exact same playbook, and I don't see it working out well for either one of them. It doesn't make any sense. You hit on it perfectly. When coaches leave New England for head coaching opportunities and try to sign all of their former New England players, it just doesn't work out. We haven't seen a history of it. I think that Jimmy Garoppolo is very good at throwing across the middle of the field to his tight end, George Kittle. It's what we've seen him do for multiple years now. Why would you take a very good tight end target away from him and trade him away for just a 3rd-round pick? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I don't get what they're doing. I don't think they get what they're doing. And you and I have talked about that several times on this show, where when they decided to part ways with Carr, it was because they thought they were going to get Tom Brady and reunite the New England offense, exactly what we're talking about right now. And it just didn't happen because Brady decided to retire, and now they're in no man's land going, well, what do I do? I know, I'll get the other former New England quarterback and bring him in and try and recreate New England West. And it's just, I think that it's a dumpster fire of a situation.
So now with the Jacoby Myers move, he gets 3-year, $33 million contract, $21 million guaranteed. So they're really buying into Myers being there for a few seasons at least. He was a PPR wide receiver 29 last year with Mac Jones. Is Jimmy G an upgrade at least to Mac Jones for Jacoby Myers? Can we expect more from Myers this season, even though he's behind Devontae Adams?
Yeah, I think just about anybody's an upgrade from Mac Jones. The difference is he might be getting more accurate targets, but his target competition is so much stiffer that even though he technically has a better quarterback, I'm actually bumping him down in my rankings. It's tough. Analytics guys love to talk about how targets are earned. And there's some nuance to that take. Yeah, targets are earned. Good players earn targets, but there is also target competition. That's a very real thing. And like we were talking about earlier with Allen Lazard, he jumped from a career 12% target share to a 21% target share when Devontae Adams left. And now Jacoby Myers goes from fighting to get targets against Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar and the ghost of Devontae Parker to all of a sudden being on a team with Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow. Mac Hollins might be coming back. Josh Jacobs, he's good for 50 to 60 targets out of the backfield. So I don't know if you can chalk Jacoby Myers up for any more than like 90 to 100 targets this season.
So does he finish?
I was just going to say, I wanted to touch real quick on what Nate just said. Or Dave, you're Nate. My brain is in a fog. But I actually think that Waller leaving, the person that this impacts in a positive way the most might actually be Hunter Renfrow because of his ability to work across the middle of the field and out of the slot. He might see more targets underneath without there being a Darren Waller there. So 3rd and Renfrow lives on, baby. It's back.
That makes me happy. Big Hunter Renfrow fan, even though cannot stand the Raiders. All right, now we're going to move on to an X-Raider here, guys. Darren Waller to the G-Men. Now, it was basically a swap for Kadarius Toney for Darren Waller, as far as the Giants go. The 100th pick that they got from the Kadarius Toney trade. Are you guys excited?
Which was the pick that was awarded to Kansas City because Ryan Poles became the GM of the Chicago Bears. So that pick was a comp pick for Ryan Poles, and I want Poles to trade for his own comp pick and get the 100th pick back, just so that it all fits perfectly into a nice little ball.
Well, throw it out on Twitter. Maybe tag Ryan Poles, see what happens. Yeah. Might as well. It's worth a shot, right? So Darren Waller, there's been a lot of talk about him being past his prime, but is he? Do we think that he's relevant in this offense with Daniel Jones? Does this maybe give Daniel Jones a little bit of a bump as a passer? Finally having someone to target who has shown they can be an elite pass catcher?
Hamstring injuries are scary. A guy that's been injured in back-to-back years is scary. A 31-year-old that has been dealing with injuries is scary. So I don't know, man. The risk is very high, but the reward could also be very high. It's so hard trying to project injuries. I'm sitting here hyping up Rashad Penny yesterday, getting all excited about that signing. So I can't really, flip the table and start talking about how I can't stand Darren Waller because of his injury history. But there's a lot to get nervous about. When he's on the field, I think that he's going to be great. And if you're able to pick him up in best ball and live through those spike weeks, that's great. But I am a little bit concerned about drafting him, especially in Dynasty, because he might be on his final legs.
So does it make any difference to you that he might actually be seeing less volume, but more relevant volume with Daniel Bellinger there to kind of spell him a little bit? Because now, I've been called an idiot for liking Daniel Bellinger by my co-host over here, John, and my wife. So there's that. But do you think that could help Waller's durability at least a little bit?
He's still going to be getting the snaps. The difference is he's going to be running more routes, which arguably, if you're looking at hamstring problems, you'd almost prefer him to be blocking from time to time. So He's not going in an all-out sprint and pushing those hamstrings every single play. So I don't know, man. It's so tough to project injuries, but I'm definitely a little bit nervous given Waller's age in the last 2 seasons.
Sure. That makes sense. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Now, the Giants, do you think are they going to go after another wide receiver? Do you think they go after a receiver in the draft? Are they going to try and do something in free agency? I thought they might be in on Juju, which apparently that didn't happen. So are there any free agent targets either of you would like to see them go after at this point?
Free agents, not really, but where they're sitting in the back of the first round is just prime draft a wide receiver territory for every mock that we've seen. Those picks in the 20s, you could potentially have a run on wide receivers go there to 4 or 5 teams. I'm not saying that many are going to get drafted there, but there's a lot of wide receiver needy teams late in the first round. And there's going to be very talented guys available there. Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston maybe slides because he didn't test as big at the combine. There's going to be guys available late in the first round. And I think that it's arguably the biggest position in need that they have to do this, especially just giving new money to Daniel Jones. They need to get him more weapons, and they're doing that by trading for Waller, which is great, but they're not done. Like, you can't stop there. They need to get him some young wide receivers to grow with and also help him take that step forward.
Sure. All right, guys, so let's move on here. We've got old running backs for old Miami. They brought back Jeff Wilson. They brought back Raheem Mostert. And the question on the show sheet was, are they done acquiring running backs? Are they going to set this and just maybe bring in a back-end piece for depth? And then they signed Myles Gaskin today. Is that the end of it? Are they going to try and do something sexy in the draft? Are they going to try and make a splash here in free agency, though we haven't heard much of them trying to do much of anything? Are they content with these 3 guys in their backfield? I know, Dave, that's the face I'm making about it, too, because it's ugly.
I hope not, man. Like, this is such a good offensive line, and it is such a good ecosystem for running backs. I mean, we saw a 30-year-old Raheem Mostert and a banged-up Jeff Wilson Jr. finding success in here. I thought that they were going to be, like, number 1 in the running for David Montgomery, Miles Sanders, Damian Harris. I was really hoping Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs before they got franchise tagged. That would have been a fun pipe dream. But, I really hope it's not. And, Mike McDaniel is a new head coach, and he's got his guys that he likes. Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert are guys that he's familiar with and he has liked for years. Kind of surprised to see this move, though, because Mike McDaniel leans heavily on the analytics. He should know about an age curve and know that both of these guys are on the wrong side of the age curve. So as much as I like to think that they're going to bring somebody in, they've got 3 veteran running back contracts. How much money in draft capital are they going to tie up in their backfield?
That's a fair point. John, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of leaning the same way. I think that the fantasy community has been wanting and almost begging for Miami to make a splash at running back for the last 2 to 3 years. We keep like expecting that something's going to happen and it just doesn't. At this point, I'm kind of done hoping that they're going to do something fantastic at running back. I think that their focus is in, we want versatile running backs that we can also use like on special teams and stuff like that and get multiple, positional value out of these guys and not spend a whole lot of money or attention on the backfield because we're putting all of our resources into the passing game and going into Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and stuff like that. So I have a hard time thinking that anything super meaningful is going to happen. I would love for them to take a mid-round running back. I think that would be a lot of fun because then that person is only competing potentially with the guys that we were just listed. It's not exactly a hard competition for a mid-round running back to kind of emerge as a viable fantasy asset from.
So, John, I know you're big into rookies and looking at these incoming running backs. That's not really my forte. I wait until after the draft to dive into that. The one thing that works in this offense, though, in this wide zone scheme, is having straight line speed. And that's why we see Raheem Mostert still being successful at his age. Who's the guy that you'd kind of anticipate that maybe going after in the mid-rounds that just has that one cut blazing upfield?
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that could potentially fit that bill. I really like Eric Gray. I know he's not like the super burner. He's not going to come out here and, he's not a 4-3 kind of running back, but he has some wiggle to his game. I really thought that when he went to Oklahoma, he was going to emerge as being a top tier running back and we'd see him in the conversation with the top guys. Doesn't look like that's happening for him in his draft stock. He could be someone that you get as late as round 4 or 5 if you're Miami, but he is someone that has a lot of juice and a lot of wiggle to his game. And I think in this spread it out offense that they run with all the speed and all the defenders having to shield super deep because of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, the fastest wide receiver duo in NFL history, probably. Any running back that they take there in the mid rounds, I think can find some success in a lot of running room.
So guys, for fantasy, are any of these running backs that they have rostered now worth adding even for depth at this point on your roster at their current value? Or is this something where it's probably staying away from these guys if we can?
It depends on ADP, but I'm going to want Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert because you know that neither of them are playing a full 17 games. And when one goes down, the other is going to be a fringe RB1 that week. So these are the guys in Dynasty that you can probably get for a 4th round pick right now. I mean, nobody is, thinking that you're sending out offers for Raheem Mostert or he's the guy that, you push a package over the edge trying to get. But I'd be trying to acquire Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. right now, especially if you're, doing a 0 running back build. These are the guys that you plug in for those random weeks where they have RB1 upside.
Well, and
I just can't help thinking that they're gonna do something completely different than anything we just mentioned, and they're gonna take one of like the biggest bruising running backs in the second round and like come out with a Condre Miller or like wait a couple rounds and taking Israel Abanikanda out of Pitt and just get a big bruiser. We'll be like that. What the hell? Like that doesn't that doesn't make sense. It's gonna be fun. I think it's gonna be very interesting.
So speaking of bruising runners, guys, it was announced today that the Cowboys will be releasing Ezekiel Elliot post June 1st. It saves him $10.9 million in cap space. This is kind of a loaded move here because now we're looking at Tony Pollard being the RB1. My first question is, Tony Pollard, could he be the overall RB1 in 2023? Do you think he has it in him, even though he's, 5 years into his career now, so he's getting kind of older for a running back? But he was so dynamic last season. John, what do you think about that?
I think that all of the metrics and everything that we saw in terms of like his big play ability, yards after contact, everything is there for him. That like his fantasy points per touch, I think was number 1 amongst all running backs last year. He just tears it up when he's given the opportunity. Now, so much still remains to be in terms of how these rosters are going to be finally constructed. And I know that they're cutting Zeke. And I know that Pollard is the guy right now, but I just don't know if this is the end of the story and if we're going to see another running back land in Dallas. If Bijan Robinson is on the board in the first round, Jerry Jones going just full Jerry and taking Bijan would not surprise me at all because it's Jerry Jones. We have no idea. He didn't necessarily need CeeDee Lamb when he drafted CeeDee Lamb, but CeeDee Lamb was on the board and he took him anyways. So I just have no idea how this offseason is going to go. And I have a hard time thinking that Tony Pollard is in line for many more touches than what we saw out of him last year, which is still a very, very solid fantasy asset. But
Well,
getting
he was
overall
RB8.
RB1, yeah, I know it's fantastic. But getting to that overall RB1 level, I feel like he would have to have north of 300 touches in order to make that happen, and I just don't know if we're going to see that.
And I think the overall RB1 potential is there if they don't take a running back within the first 2 days.
Right.
But if they spend a first round, second round, or a third round pick on a running back, that is going to cap the upside. But I'm with you, John. I mean, right now, if you're doing projections, you could probably project Tony Pollard for about 300 points and one of the best. But I don't think that we've seen the end of how this backfield's going to look.
I agree. John, you just want everybody to get Bijan. Like, I swear, every time
I just love Bijan.
Well, I mean, what's not to love? He's like kind of Barry Sanders light, right? The way he
I will
runs.
say I'm with John, though. The two teams that I have, and we've just happened to talk about both of them, but I think that the Bears or the Cowboys are the two teams that are most likely to end up with Bijan.
Yeah, I thought the Eagles were going to be in on it, but then I don't think they're in on it anymore. So
they might be, though.
You never know.
$1 to Rashad Penny. What? He's
That's
guaranteed.
true.
I mean, it was a small contract, so they're still in the running for another back.
And that was when I tweeted that fit out of Bijan to Philly last offseason when I was looking ahead to this year's draft, because I knew that Miles Sanders and Boston Scott were both going to be hitting free agency. And I was like, hey, maybe they could be a suitor and bring Bijan to the NFC East. And so I still would love to see that happen. If he goes there, it'd be fantastic. And everyone who just went out and traded for Rashad Penny in the last day would cry. But I don't. It's so hard because Bijan is so talented that he should be a top 5 pick, but it's how is the running back position valued in the current NFL and how are these GMs going to look at it? I have no idea where he's going to go. He could go super early. Sitting at 9 to Chicago is very interesting, or he could be a super late first round pick going to a playoff team that's just looking to add the cherry on top of their roster.
Kansas City.
It could.
I'd just be mad.
Yeah, as a
Did you guys see the
Denver fan,
news
I'm sure
that just
they
came
would.
through? Jamal Williams is not returning to Detroit, signed with New Orleans.
Ooh, spicy.
Oh, New Orleans, that's interesting.
I don't hate
Oh,
that.
he's going to look real good in that black and gold.
3-year deal, too. They got him locked up through age 30.
Oh, wow. So, okay, this is interesting. So, what does this tell? Do you think this tells us anything about Alvin Kamara then? Do you think they're expecting him to be suspended?
I think that Jamal Williams is the prototypical Robin to Kamara's Batman that we've seen throughout his entire career. It was Mark Ingram, Latavius Murray. They always have that bruiser. So I don't know if this is too telling. If they went out and they got a guy that they can use in the receiving game as a pass catching weapon, that would tell us a little bit more. But we've seen throughout Kamara's entire career that they're always going to pair him up with a guy like Jamal Williams.
Which makes sense.
So,
he's not that grinder guy, for sure.
If you told me a year ago that Derek Carr would be handing off to Jamal Williams in New Orleans, I would be like, what just transpired?
And Michael Thomas is still there, too. Yeah. That's the one thing that I think surprised us all more than anything.
Yeah,
we'll see. That's going to be an interesting situation with Carr and Michael Thomas. I feel like Michael Thomas is probably a really good fit for Carr's skill set. They call him Slant Boy. Derek Carr loves to throw slants, so we're going to see some interesting things in New Orleans. Now, the second part of this whole Zeke thing, where does he end up? Buffalo?
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe.
I mean, you pair him up with James Cook, so you're not asking him to do a ton. You're basically putting him in that role with what he did with Tony Pollard last season. For me, I feel like that's the best fit. Is there anywhere you guys would rather see him go?
Zeke has been an Iron Man throughout his career. This dude never misses games. Finally got hurt last year. The fact that Jerry Jones cut him mid-contract, what are they? They're eating like $12 million to cut Ezekiel Elliott. Yeah. I love Ezekiel Elliott, but between his college workload and what he has done so far in the NFL, there's no tread left on those tires. And it's crazy because I think he's still only 27?
27.
Yeah, still, not young by running back standards, but you'd expect him to have a few more years in the tank. But I don't know if we're going to see him contribute much after this.
Well, see, and that's a fair point because he's just had so much volume. John, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we know that Austin Eckler has been given permission to seek a trade. So if that happens and they don't have anyone there, maybe they look to bring Zeke in as an early down thumper for the Chargers. And they have got a couple other depth running backs on the roster. I'm sick
Joshua
and exhausted
Kelly.
in my brain. Joshua Kelly,
Isaiah
Isaiah
Spiller.
Spiller. Isaiah Spiller was the name that I was looking for. So that could be interesting for Spiller if he gets more of a kind of third down role in that offense with Ezekiel Elliott as the thumper. Maybe that's something. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do with Austin Eckler looking for a trade though.
Yeah, that is an interesting situation at his age and what he has done, the volume that he's had. Do you think they're actually going to be able to move him for the probable asking price that the Chargers are going to have?
I think we talked about this yesterday, John. We were like, hey, if he'll take a 6th round pick, go for it. But yeah,
Sure.
my fear is that they're asking for, a day 2 pick. And I think it would be foolish to give up a day 2 pick for a 28-year-old back with that contract.
But we know there are teams foolish enough to do it. So.
This is the situation where no one expects it. This is what Miami will do, is that they'll go get Austin Eckler to put in a pass-catching role down there, and we'll all go, oh, shut up. And he'll be like everyone's overall RB1.
He should be in that offense.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. Actually, that's a really good idea. They should make that happen.
All right, guys, let's get into the best of the rest. We hit pretty much all of the big moves that we've seen so far. Some smaller moves we've seen. We've got Hayden Hurst going to Carolina on a 3-year deal worth up to $21.75 million. That's more than I thought he would get in free agency. And apparently they're going to be pairing him with Andy Dalton, who got a 2-year, $11 million deal. I like to call him Sam Darnold Sr., mostly based on looks, but a little bit of the playing ability as well. Do you guys care about either of these moves? Does it make any difference to you on any of your dynasty squads? Are you looking to acquire Dalton? Are you looking to go after Hayden Hurst?
So
I'll tell you what, it matters to both Dave and I is that the Bears have their pick next year. So yes, it matters to us very much how they do. So I'm hoping that offense sucks and that Andy Dalton looks horrible and that we're walking into Marvin Harrison Jr. in next year's draft. That's what I care about. So yeah, in terms of actual fantasy value though, I think that Hayden Hurst, the tight end position is so wide open. The back half of tight end ones are all basically interchangeable, and they don't have anyone else really to throw the ball to down there. So he's probably going to be their best red zone threat other than running the ball. So yeah, maybe he's a back end tight end 1, which isn't saying much, but I think that he might have some games. And, just like most tight ends, if they score a touchdown, they make your week. If they don't, it's going to hurt. And I think that that's mostly going to be what Hayden Hurts is looking at in Carolina.
That was a real Cole Kmet statement there, John. But I agree with you. Hurst, Andy Dalton, I mean, could you have a more vanilla quarterback? Really? It doesn't help.
It's your prototypical bridge quarterback. I mean, he was the bridge quarterback for Justin Fields. He played the first few games of the season, then Justin Fields took over, and he'll play the first few games of this season until C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson or Will Levis takes over. It is weird, though, that they gave him a 2-year deal, because if they're looking at him as a bridge quarterback, I don't want to read too deeply into this, but, Frank Reich likes to have that big-bodied, physical quarterback. That's what he did with Carson Wentz. Maybe Anthony Richardson. Maybe they plan on just sitting him for an entire year, letting Andy Dalton play, let Richardson get an entire year on the bench, and then roll him out in 2024.
That's kind of been my assumption with this. Yeah.
When the news happened, that's what I tweeted, that you're giving yourself patience to let a rookie quarterback really take their time and grow. Who needs that in this draft class the most? It's Anthony Richardson. So I'm thinking that they might be looking at that.
Yeah, if you're bringing in Stroud or Young, those guys are pro ready. There's no reason to bring in a bridge quarterback. You can bring them in, give them one offseason, and plug them in week 1. So I think that they may have tipped their hat a little bit after trading for 1 overall and then signing Andy Dalton to a 2-year deal, that they might be going for one of these project quarterbacks.
Well, the nice thing is they tipped their hand, but they have the first pick, so there isn't anything anyone can do about it. So good for them. I want to see Anthony Richardson in a place like that where he has a year or 2 to grow. That's where I think he'll be successful. Same way I feel about Malik Willis, though they're 2 completely different players. Now we've got Baker Mayfield to Tampa Bay. He's reportedly going to compete with Kyle Trask. Now I will tell you right now, I don't care who the quarterback is there, other than the value of Godwin and Evans. That's where I'm concerned. And my fear is if Mayfield wins a starting job, we saw what he did with OBJ. Are we going to have a situation like that with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin heading into the season where it just crushes their fantasy value?
Yeah. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are dead in fantasy. I mean, I hate to say it, but Baker Mayfield, the best fantasy wide receiver he has ever supported. This guy's been in the league for 5 years now. Best fantasy quarterback he ever supported was Jarvis Landry in 2019, wide receiver 23 in PPR, or in points per game. I mean, he is just kryptonite. We saw Odell Beckham in his prime go to Cleveland, and I think he had one season with 1,000 yards. Granted, there were some injuries in there, but even when he was healthy, Baker Mayfield just doesn't know how to support fantasy relevant weapons. And we've seen it with Jameis Winston, Tom Brady, 5 straight years where Chris Godwin and Mike Evans had wide receiver 1 upside every single week. I've got them both right now as, kind of fringe wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3s in my rankings.
Yeah, that's fair. I was already there with Evans. I feel like he's on that Julio Jones arc. Just looking at their career, he's hitting that point where Jones kind of fell off. I hope you're wrong, but I'm pretty sure that you're right, Dave. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about, the Denver Broncos, my boys here in Denver, they upgraded big time at their line. They're letting go of Dalton Reisner, but we got Ben Powers from Baltimore, Mike McGlinchey from San Francisco. That was a big need for this team. And while we don't generally talk about offensive line in fantasy, this is a big deal because that line was so porous, and that affected Russell Wilson endlessly last season, and it affected their ability to run the ball. They got better at the end of the season once we got rid of Hackett. They actually got some decent coaching in there. And then they went out and signed Samaje Perine. I always say it wrong for some reason. 2-year, $7.5 million deal. There are two things to me with this. It signals to me that they don't think Javonte Williams is going to be ready to start the season, first of all. And second of all, he might not play at all. The knee injury was that bad. Perine hasn't really been a workhorse. So obviously they're going to bring in a Latavius Murray. So I think it's going to be Latavius Murray, familiar with Sean Payton. But is this a better situation for Perine than he had being behind Mixon in Cincinnati, or is this just kind of going to be a lateral move for him?
To me, it's pretty lateral. I mean, I'm not really interested. I'm not seeing him as a workhorse running back. I don't think that is going to make a whole lot of sense. The Javonte Williams injury sucks. It sucks really bad because he was so damn good in college. I absolutely loved him as a prospect. So it really sucks to see him going through the injury and that it's going to take a long time for him to get back on the field. We don't know what he's going to look like when he does. They got to really start looking at that backfield and saying like, hey, we might need to start planning for a backfield that doesn't focus on Javonte Williams, which is just crushing for me to say. But this could be a team that is also looking at running back in the draft and looking to add to that room and bring somebody else in that's going to have a little bit more juice and not quite as much wear and tear as the guys that you just mentioned. Because if you have a running back core of Latavius Murray and Samaje Perine, that's a lot of miles that you have those running backs have. I could absolutely see them adding a young piece to that backfield, maybe one that's more focused in a pass-catching role to really give Russell Wilson some easy checkdowns. We saw Sean Payton with Alvin Kamara, how much he loves that type of running back and having the kind of dual threat thunder and lightning style. Well, okay, Samaje Perine is your thunder, and now you need to get some lightning in that offense as well. So a day 2, maybe even sneaking into day 3 because there's just so many running backs in this draft class. But I could absolutely see them adding someone else that might function more in a pass-catching role in the draft.
So I'll end it on this note. If it was still Josh McDaniels in Denver, you know what he'd do is he'd go get Zeke and pair him with those 3. And that's why I am so glad he's not the Broncos coach. Guys, it's been a great show. Thank you, Dave, so much for coming on with us. We'll definitely have to get you back on again. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. Please make sure you like and subscribe to the Razzball channel so you don't miss any shows, and we will see you next week.
I stay loose, I stay hype. I stay loose, I stay hype. I stay loose, I stay hype. I could do this all night.